They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family. I used to think that was just a dramatic quote people threw around online, something to make their Instagram captions feel profound. But now I know it with every aching fiber of my body. My name is Kaylin Archer, and this is the story of how my parents robbed me of a future I spent decades building, and how I took it back, inch by inch, dollar by dollar, soul by soul. It started on a Monday. Funny how life loves to crash down on you right after the weekend pretends everything's fine. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a coffee going cold, laptop open to a spreadsheet that I had no idea would unravel my whole life. I had taken a voluntary sabbatical from my job as a marketing director 6 months prior. The plan was simple. Breathe, reflect, start sketching out the next phase. Maybe open that consultancy I always talked about. Maybe write the travel blog I kept telling myself I'd launch someday. I had been smart, saved aggressively, invested carefully, paid into every retirement vehicle available. 401k, Roth IRA, even a modest SEP plan for my freelance gigs. I wasn't rich, but I was stable. Or so I thought. That morning, I was checking in with my retirement accounts. My Vanguard login kept throwing errors. I tried Fidelity, same story. Weird, but not alarming, until I called. Until the chipper voice on the other end asked me to verify my identity, and then went quiet for just a beat too long after I did. I'm sorry, Ms. Archer, it appears your accounts were fully liquidated 8 months ago. I remember blinking at the kitchen wall. What? That's not possible. I didn't authorize any withdrawals. I understand. But the notes here say the withdrawals were made with verified credentials and a power of attorney signed and notarized by your parents, Richard and Ann Archer. The world turned sideways. I didn't hang up the phone so much as let it fall. My coffee spilled. I didn't notice. I think I sat there for 30 full minutes, staring at nothing, until my neighbor tapped on the glass door because my smoke alarm had gone off from the toaster I forgot was on. My parents had taken everything. I drove to their house that afternoon. It was exactly the kind of New England home you'd expect to find in an old folksy calendar. White shutters, garden gnomes, a wind chime that tinkled like it had secrets. My dad opened the door like nothing was wrong. Mom was arranging flowers in the hallway. Kaylin, to what do we owe the pleasure? I need to talk to you, now. Their smiles faltered. They led me into the living room. Same floral couches. Same scent of lemon polish and thyme. I stood. They sat like a courtroom without the formality. Did you liquidate my retirement accounts? Silence. Dad cleared his throat. Mom smoothed her skirt. Neither met my eyes. You are wasting your potential, my mother said. You quit your job, Dad added. We didn't know what you were doing with your life. We thought. You thought you could steal from me? I was shaking. I didn't even realize I'd started crying until I tasted salt. It wasn't stealing, Mom said too quickly. It was preemptive support. We moved it into a safer account. We were just holding it for you. Safe? Where? What account? Dad muttered a number. A trust. Managed by someone I didn't know. They had siphoned every cent I'd worked for. My emergency fund, my retirement, even my HSA. And they did it legally, with forged documents and a friendly family lawyer who looked the other way. I left their house numb. That night I couldn't sleep. My hands kept twitching like they wanted to type a response to a problem I hadn't figured out yet. When dawn broke, so did the numbness. What replaced it wasn't sadness. It was strategy. I made a plan. First, I cleaned up, haircut, structured blazer. No one trusts someone seeking revenge in yoga pants. I brushed up on my certifications, reapplied for my CFA, and signed up for advanced estate law courses online. Within 3 months, I had 3 new clients as a freelance financial consultant. Within 6, I had 10. And I had leverage. I started whispering in the right ears at the local financial planning events. I made friends with the same estate lawyer who helped my parents forge the documents. I didn't threaten him, I just let him know I was digging. You know, I said one night after a seminar, some people would pay a lot to make sure their names don't come up in financial malpractice investigations. He got very quiet. I built a network of retirees and divorcees and startup founders, helping them protect assets from exactly the kind of betrayal I'd suffered. My specialty? Family-proofing financial legacies. All while inching closer to my parents' finances. You see, they weren't just hoarding my money. They were drowning in bad investments. Shiny real estate developments in Arizona. A vineyard in Spain they had no clue how to manage. High-risk, low-return nonsense that smelled like desperation. So I made myself indispensable. I visited more, asked questions, offered help. Dad, that vineyard management fee looks steep. Mind if I take a look at the books? Mom, your capital gains strategy isn't optimized. Want me to review your portfolio? At first, they resisted. But time has a funny way of humbling people. They needed me more than they feared me. And eventually, they asked me to take over. The irony? They made me their financial advisor. And I accepted. Because when you put me in control, you forget I was the one you robbed. I didn't rush. Revenge that lasts is built slowly. I reorganized their trusts, moved assets offshore, set up staggered distributions that required layers of approval. By the time I was done, they couldn't sneeze without me knowing about it. And they thanked me for it. I never gave them a cent back. Instead, I redirected portions of the recovered funds into an LLC, my LLC, one they had no legal claim to. And then I bought something with it. Their house. Yes, I bought the family home, quietly, through a shell company. When they defaulted on the second mortgage, I told them not to take. The bank sold it at a loss. To me. They still don't know I own it. But they will. Soon. Because next week, I'm showing up with the new deed, the property tax record, and the eviction notice. They took my future. So I took theirs. And this? This is just the beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. I'd love to tell you that the day I served my parents, the eviction notice was the climax. That there was some explosive confrontation, tears, shouting, maybe even a dramatic storm outside for flair. But reality rarely follows cinematic timing. What happened was quieter, stranger, and in some ways, more powerful. I wore a simple navy sheath dress and low heels. Professional, cold, not cruel, just sharp enough to remind them who I'd become. I parked across the street and stared at the house for a long minute, not because I was nervous, because I was remembering every memory that home held. Every moment they made me feel small inside it. Every dollar of mine that paid for its roof, unbeknownst to me. My mother opened the door before I even knocked. Kaylin, darling, we weren't expecting. I held up the envelope. You should read this. Her eyes flicked over the return address. A legal firm in Cambridge. Not mine, of course. A partner I trusted. Someone who didn't blink twice when I said, I need this airtight, quiet, untraceable. She didn't invite me in. She opened it right there. Her face slackened with every line she read. My father shuffled in a minute later. His robe belt was half-tied. I didn't speak. I waited, watched. He took the paper from her trembling hands and read. And then, finally, he looked at me. You bought the house? Yes. Through a shell company? Yes. You're evicting us? You took my future. I'm reclaiming the past. My mother tried to speak, but her mouth was just soundless movement, like a fish gasping for air. I didn't pity her. I used to, but not anymore. You have 60 days, I said. That's more than generous. My father leaned against the banister, one hand on his chest. We raised you. You raised me to be careful, I replied. And I was. You weren't. Now you live with it. I turned and walked down the steps without looking back. And that should have been it. But it wasn't. Because betrayal, real betrayal, doesn't vanish after a single act of justice. It lingers, infects, mutates. My story didn't end at that door. It expanded. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my sister. Kaylin, what the hell did you do? Alicia had always been the golden child. Lawyer, married to an equally insufferable investment banker, 2 private school kids, and a social media presence so curated, It practically came with a marketing team. We hadn't been close since college. I bought their house, and now they want to move in with me. I smiled. Sounds like you'll finally get the family time you always wanted. She paused. I heard the wine glass clink. They're saying you manipulated them, that you trapped them in a legal loophole. Alicia, I saw a legal loophole. Silence again. What do you want? Nothing from you yet. And I hung up. But that call planted a seed. Not of guilt, of opportunity. My parents weren't just irresponsible, they were dangerous. The kind of people who would smile at you across Thanksgiving dinner, while quietly shifting your savings into a family trust you never agreed to. If I really wanted to protect others, people like me who trusted too long, forgave too often, I had to think bigger. That's when I decided to open my firm. The name, Archer and Axiom. Tagline, protect what they told you not to worry about. It started with small clients, women mostly, divorcees, late bloomers, artists who had been told for years they were irresponsible with money. I taught them structure, showed them how to turn panic into planning, set up revocable trusts with airtight contingencies, set up emergency freezes, automated asset alerts. We created digital firewalls around their lives. One client, Denise, found out her brother had forged her signature to take over their inheritance. I got her every penny back. Another, Maya, had her ex-husband still listed as her emergency contact and beneficiary despite being remarried for 3 years. We fixed that within a week. Word spread. I hired 2 staff, then 4, then a partner. And that's when I saw the name. In a portfolio application, one of my juniors was vetting Archer Family Vineyard Holdings, LLC. It was my parents' shell company, still active. Run it down, I told her. She came back with a list of investors. My sister was one of them. So it wasn't just that she didn't care what they did to me, she benefited shady from it. Alicia had been shielding their assets, hiding them offshore through shell entities tied to her firm. She wasn't a bystander. She was a co-conspirator. So I did what any financial advisor with a grudge and a spreadsheet would do. I mapped it all out. Every transaction, every shadow entity, every tax irregularity. And then I requested a quiet audit, not on her, on the Comilai Moral, Vi Mackes to Anur. It triggered everything. By the time the federal review began, she was scrambling. Trying to distance herself, sell shares, reassign ownership. It was too late. The vineyard was seized. My parents lost their biggest investment. Alicia's name hit 3 internal review boards. Her firm suspended her. And I? I slept like a baby. Until the subpoena arrived. Yes, that happened. Because, apparently, when you start pulling strings that connect to other strings that were never meant to be seen, people get nervous. They want to know who you are. Who taught you to dig this deep? Where your leverage really lies. I didn't panic, but I did pause. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about war. And if I was going to win, I needed allies. So I called him. My old mentor, Nathan Grigsby, former head of financial compliance at a global firm, retired early after a whistleblower case nearly got him blacklisted. Kaylin, he said, as if no time had passed, what have you done? Built a wall around myself, but now they're digging under it. He laughed, but not kindly. Then let's teach them what happens when you meet a woman who knows the blueprints. He joined as senior advisor, and everything accelerated. We exposed 3 more networks tied to my family's shady holdings. I filed 2 legal complaints, helped 10 clients file restraining orders against coercive family members. My work went from niche to national. And then came the podcast. Family Fraud, they called it. The host was slick, sarcastic, and deeply curious. They wanted my story. At first, I refused. But Nathan said something that stuck. You didn't just survive, you systemized it, and the world is full of daughters like you. So I said yes. The episode dropped on a Thursday. By Sunday, it had 500,000 downloads. By Monday, my inbox was on fire. Stories of betrayal, theft, secrets buried in estate plans and insurance policies, daughters, sons, nieces, widows. And I knew then that what started with my parents wasn't just personal. It was epidemic. That same week, I received a certified letter from my mother. Handwritten. Kaylin, you've made your point. Please stop. Your father isn't well. We can't keep living like this. You've always been cold, but this is cruel. Please let it go. Love. Mom, I burned it. You don't get to weaponize love after you stole my life. But I also did something else. I ordered a medical review for my father, through the firm, because I am not them, and I need to remember that. But I will not stop. Not until every document has been exposed. Not until I've unspooled every fake trust, every misused POA, every forged signature and silenced sibling. Not until my name stops trembling in their mouths. Not until the system they built collapses under the truth. This story isn't about money anymore. It's about justice. And I intend to collect every last cent of it. 3 days after I burned my mother's letter, the media storm hit. The podcast episode had made the rounds, but something about it struck a nerve in the financial world. Maybe it was the timing. A string of inheritance scandals was already floating in the news. Or maybe it was the host's sharp closing line. If your family controls your future, you don't own it. Quote, within 48 hours, a financial journalist from The Guardian reached out. Then Business Insider. Then a well-known ethics and compliance watchdog invited me to speak at their annual summit in Geneva. I wasn't ready. But I went. Because part of taking back your power is standing in spaces you were never invited into and refusing to shrink. Geneva was sleek, cold, expensive, a city of quiet deals and elegant silences. The summit hall was polished steel and white linen, filled with people whose net worths were written in billions, not salaries. When I stood behind that podium, looking out at their polished shoes and sharper eyes, I felt that familiar twinge. You don't belong here. But I did. And when I opened with my story, I didn't flinch. I told them about the forged documents, the betrayal, the power of weaponized family trust. I told them how my parents saw my independence as a threat to their control. I even showed slides. One of them was a scanned image of the forged power of attorney my parents used. It wasn't just a document. It was a war declaration. After the talk, people didn't just clap, they lined up. An Italian heiress who'd been cut out of her inheritance by her brothers. A retired Swiss banker whose wife forged his signature to fund her lover's company. An American surgeon whose mother embezzled from her trust fund to pay off a gambling debt. All of them wanted help. So I did what I always do. I started building a system. Back in Boston, I expanded Archer and Axiom, doubled the staff, tripled the server capacity, hired private investigators, cyber forensic experts, former IRS agents. We weren't just a firm anymore, we were a fortress. Our specialty? Hidden asset exposure and stealth recovery. We had a motto framed above the door. They can hide it, we can find it. But not everyone was thrilled. I started receiving anonymous threats, not dramatic ones. No unmarked envelopes or dripping red ink. Just subtle things. Emails from ghost accounts suggesting I, quote, old wounds heal. My car alarm went off 3 nights in a row with no apparent cause. A background check on one of our new clients came back with falsified credentials. We traced him to a firm that once represented my sister's husband. Alicia was trying to get ahead of me. And she wasn't the only one. A week later, I got a call from a woman named Lorraine Grant. She was soft-spoken, deliberate, with the kind of calm that comes from surviving something monstrous. You don't know me, Ms. Archer, she said, but I know your story. I think we may have the same enemy. She was a former assistant to the partner who notarized my forged documents. And she had receipts. Hundreds of them. Emails, memos, meeting logs, transactions that lined up with multiple suspicious POAs, not just mine. This man had been running a side racket for years, helping affluent families rewire their children's inheritances into protective trusts under the guise of legal guardianship. It wasn't just immoral. It was criminal. We met in a safe house conference room at one of Archer and Axiom's satellite offices. Nathan and two attorneys sat in while Lorraine unpacked a leather folio like it held state secrets. It kinda did. There were over 30 names. Families I recognized. Clients. Friends of clients. People who had no idea they were being slowly robbed under the legal radar. "Why now?" I asked her. "Because you made it survivable," she said. "I watched you burn everything down and stand in the ashes like you were made of steel. I want to help build what comes next." I gave her a job on the spot. With Lorraine on board, we launched Project Hades, a full-scale investigation into coordinated POA fraud. Quiet. Clinical. Unapologetic. We drafted a report. We sent it to every regulatory body we could. We also sent a copy to my sister. I knew she'd panic. I wanted her to. She called the next day. "Kaylin, what the hell do you think you're doing? Justice, you might try it sometime. You're going to ruin this family. You ruined it the moment you signed those offshore transfer documents. I've seen the timestamp." She exhaled hard. "Do y'all want money? Is that it? You want a payout?" "No, I want accountability." "God, you sound like a prosecutor." "Not yet." Click. I didn't hear from her for weeks. But that silence was its own kind of music. Because while she panicked, I grew. Archer and Axiom became a headline. Our cases started trending on financial blogs and advocacy forums. People were calling us the whistleblower haven for heirs and heiresses. We were invited to the SEC's Ethical Innovation Roundtable. We co-authored a paper with Harvard Law. And I kept one screen always open. My parents' trust. I watched it shrink in real time. Every audit, every correction, every asset moved into escrow. It was like watching a dam collapse in slow motion. And then, one morning, I received an encrypted message. No sender. Just a link. A Dropbox folder. Inside? Surveillance photos, wire transfers, internal memos. All about me. Someone had been watching. Not just recently. For over a year. They had transcripts of my meetings, pixelated photos of my dinner dates, even a note about my favorite brand of red wine. This wasn't just legal blowback. This was personal. And I had no idea who sent it. Nathan was livid. "We need to pull back. Go dark for a month, let the lawyers run perimeter." But I couldn't. Because I recognized one of the photos. It was from the night I handed my parents the eviction notice. The angle was from the neighbor's attic. I remembered seeing the curtains twitch. I dug through zoning permits, found the name of the homeowner. He was dead. Had been for 6 months before that night. The house had been bought by an anonymous holding firm 2 weeks prior. I ran the registration through our system. It pinged back to a name I hadn't seen in 15 years. Elliot Brand. He was my mother's ex-business partner. A man I remembered only because he used to give me strange looks at holiday parties. My mother had once told me he went to prison for insider trading, but I hadn't thought of him since. Until now. He wasn't just back. He was watching, which meant this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about legacy. My family had built their fortune on lies, and now their ghosts were crawling out of the books. And if I wanted to end it, I had to go deeper. Into their past. Into mine. Because somewhere in those dusty documents, forged forms, and offshore accounts was the blueprint of the machine they used to control me. And I was finally ready to dismantle it. Screw by screw. Asset by asset. Truth by brutal, blinding truth. The folder of surveillance photos sat on my desk for days, untouched. I kept telling myself I needed to hand it off to the lawyers. Or to Nathan. Or to anyone else. But I didn't. Because no matter how much I tried to convince myself that it was just a file, Just data. Something about it felt more intimate, more invasive. As if someone had mapped my movements not to catch me, but to understand me. I studied the photos late at night, drinking wine I didn't taste. Every angle. Every timestamp. Whoever had taken these wasn't just spying. They were documenting. It was a biography in shadows. They knew when I left work, when I picked up groceries, when I visited my old university. Even when I went on that one disastrous date with the accountant from Cambridge who wouldn't stop talking about cryptocurrency, they knew. And they'd been waiting. Elliot Brand. The name sent something sour down my spine. He had been my parents' financial architect when I was still in middle school. I only knew that because one night I had walked into the living room past bedtime and caught a glimpse of him on speakerphone. My mother had said, "We can't afford a mistake like this again, Elliot, not after Paraguay." I hadn't understood it then. Now I intended to. Lorraine and I worked side by side for nearly 4 weeks, tracking down every connection between Elliot and my parents' financial past. What we uncovered was worse than I imagined. There were shell companies registered under false names. Foundations with noble-sounding causes that never filed a single charitable report. There was even a holding account in a Gibraltar-based bank that, according to our data scrape, had been closed and reopened under 6 different surnames, one of which was my mother's maiden name. These weren't just ethical violations. They were crimes. And the money? The money they took from me wasn't the first. I wasn't their first victim. I was just the first to fight back. That realization almost broke me, because it meant I had been raised in a lie deeper than I ever thought possible. Nathan took one look at the Gibraltar accounts and said, "This doesn't end in court. This ends in Congress." I believed him. But I wasn't ready for what came next. On a foggy Monday morning, I got a call from a blocked number. I answered, bracing myself for threats or games. But the voice on the other end was calm, familiar. "Kaylin, it's Elliot." I didn't speak. "I know you found the folder." "That wasn't meant to frighten you." "Then what was it for?" "Insurance. I had to know if you were ready to see the rest." "The rest of what?" He sighed, slow and deliberate. "Your parents weren't just protecting themselves. They were protecting you from something they thought you couldn't handle. They stole my future because they were trying to bury their past and yours." He sent me coordinates, an address in the Berkshires, a cabin I didn't recognize. I hesitated. Nathan told me not to go. Lorraine offered to call in a favor with local law enforcement, but I went, alone. The cabin was buried in pine trees and silence. A narrow gravel road wound through forest, ending in a clearing that looked like it had seen better decades. The structure itself was weather-worn, shuttered, and unremarkable. Inside, it smelled like old paper and oil. There were filing cabinets along one wall, a safe in the corner, and a single desk covered in dust. On that desk was a folder, labeled Kaylin, Contingency. My hand shook as I opened it. Photos. Of me as a baby. But not in our family home. In another house. With another woman. There was a birth certificate. Not my name. Another. Natalie Claire Rivers. Born to Julia Rivers. No father listed. I flipped page after page, nausea rising in my throat. Court documents. Guardianship transfers. Confidential adoption agreements. And finally, one that bore my mother's signature. Petition for emergency custody. Filed when I was 4. I wasn't their biological daughter. They adopted me after my birth mother died. And they never told me. I stumbled out of the cabin, folder clutched in my arms, wind cutting my breath in half. The world looked different, smaller, sharper. Every memory I had suddenly felt staged, conditional. My life wasn't just stolen. It was manufactured. I drove straight to Nathan's and walked into his office without knocking. He took one look at my face and said, "What did they do now?" I dropped the folder on his desk. He read it all. Twice. "Jesus Christ, Kaylin. What do I do with this?" He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You decide who you are. and then you decide who pays. I thought I knew who I was. But Natalie Claire Rivers? That was a name I had never heard, a girl I had never met. And Julia, my mother? What had she been like? Why had no one told me about her? Who else knew? The next day, I went back to the cabin with Lorraine. We cataloged everything, took photos, scanned files, sent duplicates to 3 different secure locations. Then I started looking for Julia Rivers. Obituaries, hospital records, foster system archives. She had died in a car accident, single car crash, no autopsy, no toxicology report filed. Suspicious. Too clean. A week later, I found something else. A letter Julia wrote to a friend before her death. Never sent. Still in the envelope. I think they're watching me again. The same people from the foundation. If anything happens to me, tell Natalie I'm sorry I couldn't protect her. She'll have to find the truth on her own. The foundation. That word again. I started tracing every foundation my parents were involved in during the year I was adopted. There were 3, all dissolved, but one had records still buried in an old municipal database in New Haven. The Riverlight Foundation. Mission: provide support for low-income single mothers. It was a front for funneling children into privileged homes under legal but unethical pretenses. And Elliot Brand was on the founding board. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was a network, a machine, and I was its most successful product. Or I had been. Because now, I was its undoing. I went public. Not with everything, not yet, but enough. I wrote an op-ed for The Atlantic. Told my story, my name, my real name, Natalie Rivers. The woman I was before they erased me. It exploded. The article was shared 1 million times in a week. Interview requests poured in. Investigative teams opened cold cases. Survivors of similar programs started reaching out. I wasn't alone. And my parents? They disappeared. Sold the second house. Liquidated their remaining accounts. Alicia stopped returning calls entirely. But they couldn't hide from what came next. Because I filed a class action lawsuit against the Riverlight Foundation's remaining estate. And named them. Publicly. As co-conspirators in systemic child displacement fraud. The legal team tried to negotiate. Offered me a massive settlement in exchange for silence. I refused. Because this story ends in court. And I want the world to hear every word. Every lie. Every document. Every theft. Every erased name. Including mine. Kaylin Archer. Natalie Rivers. Whatever name I choose next, it will be mine. Not theirs. And when this ends, it will end on my terms. For me. And for every girl like me who was told their story belonged to someone else. Not anymore. The day I filed the class action suit, I didn't sleep. Not out of fear, not anymore. But because I could feel it happening. The axis of my life tilting. I had stepped into the kind of battle most people never imagined taking on. Not against a person. Not even against a family. But against a system. One so old and entrenched it had vines in every corner of the legal garden. And I was tearing it out by the roots. The morning after, my name was everywhere. News anchors mispronounced it. Headlines got parts of the story wrong, but the core message stayed intact. Asterisk, financial advisor exposes orchestrated adoption scandal tied to family empire. The part they didn't print? The rage. The calculation. The part of me that stopped seeking justice and started hunting something deeper. Reckoning. I met with my legal team at 6 a.m. sharp. We took over a conference suite in the Prudential Tower. From the windows, the city looked small. I felt larger than it for once. We had to be methodical. I'd named not only my parents and the remnants of the Riverlight Foundation, but also Elliot Brand and 5 co-founders, 3 of whom still sat on advisory boards across various East Coast philanthropic institutions. We were going after a machine that had smiled for pictures while stealing lives. We need one more, Nathan said, sliding a folder toward me. Someone who can flip. Someone from the inside. Lorraine? He shook his head. She was a secretary, a whistleblower, no board access. I'm talking about someone who signed the documents. Someone with a clean image and a paper trail. I opened the folder. And there it was. A name I hadn't thought about in years. Dr. Madeline Harrow. Family counselor, public speaker, authored a best-selling book on raising resilient daughters. She had also been the court-appointed therapist who had reviewed my case file when I was 4, the one who rubber-stamped my placement into the Archer family. If we could get her, it would fracture everything. She won't talk, I said. She built her whole career on this system. Nathan leaned in. Then we make her talk. The first email I sent her bounced. So did the second. Her website had gone dark. Her publishing contact returned an automated response. Dr. Harrow is on sabbatical. But I knew how to find people. We tracked her to a remote eco-retreat in Vermont. Not a cult. Barely. One of those places where wealthy retirees paid 5 figures to rediscover silence in smoothies. We drove up unannounced. She was gardening, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and pruning a rose bush with surgical precision. Dr. Harrow? She turned, didn't flinch, didn't look surprised. Natalie. The name caught in my chest. She hadn't called me that in decades. You remember? I remember every girl. We sat at a picnic table near the greenhouse. Lorraine recorded. Nathan observed. Why did you approve my placement? I asked. She stared at her hands. You were already marked. By the time they brought you to me, everything was in motion. But you had authority. Not real authority. Not then. You don't understand the pressure, the connections. Then help me understand. She hesitated, then said something I didn't expect. They threatened to revoke my license, said I was unstable, that if I didn't cooperate, they'd ruin me. Who? Brand, and your mother. Mostly your mother. I believed her, because I had seen what my mother did to people she couldn't control. We brought Harrow in under sealed immunity. She gave us everything. Memos, old letters, a full psychological report that had been altered before being submitted to the court. The original version had raised concerns about my father's control issues. It had been deleted. Until now. With Harrow's testimony, the lawsuit took on a new shape, no longer just a financial dispute. It became a social reckoning. A case study in what happens when power, law, and family blend into a single weapon. And that weapon is pointed at a child. Media outlets flooded in. But I was selective. I spoke only to those who let me tell the story right, raw, uneven, without polish. And the public? They listened. Donations poured in. Survivors reached out. Foundations offered support. I opened a separate fund for legal aid to other adoptees seeking truth. We called it the Rivers Endowment. It felt like things were moving. Momentum was building. Until the threats started again. But they weren't anonymous this time. They were from Alicia. A certified letter, hand-signed. A single sentence. Withdraw your name from the suit, or I will bury you with mother. Not with as in beside. As in against. She wasn't bluffing. Within a week, a counter-lawsuit appeared. Defamation. Fraud. Alleging that I had fabricated documents to damage the family name, that I had staged the cabin, that I had coerced testimony. It was a smear campaign. But she miscalculated one thing. I had already survived public disgrace. She hadn't. Her firm suspended her again. Her social media accounts vanished. Photos of her at charity events were quietly scrubbed. And then came the leak. Not from me. From an internal whistleblower at her firm. Documents showing she had moved over $300,000 into an unreported Cayman account under her husband's name. Her name hit headlines next. But mine stayed there. Because this story had legs now, and it was running. I got an email from a woman in Manchester, UK. She had been trafficked through a similar foundation under the guise of international fostering. She read my article, sent her records. Then another from Dublin, then from Vancouver, then from Milan. We mapped it. There were over 70 known organizations with ties to the Riverlight model. 70. The class action expanded. It was no longer Archer versus Riverlight. It was Rivers versus a global lie. I changed the lead plaintiff name officially. Natalie Rivers. It was time. The courtroom was packed. I wore a tailored gray suit and a steel pendant in the shape of a river delta, my real name engraved on the back. My opening statement wasn't fiery. It was deliberate. I told them I had been raised by people who thought love was control and that money made them untouchable. I told them I had spent my life being their greatest investment. And now I was their greatest liability. I ended with a quote from my birth mother's letter. Asterisk, she will have to find the truth on her own. Then I looked the judge straight in the eye. And I did. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Aspects. The trial lasted 29 days. In that time, we presented over 1,300 pieces of evidence. Testimony from 18 survivors. Video clips. Ledgers. Expert analysis on financial coercion in family structures. Alicia took the stand on day 15. She was calm, cold, rehearsed. But then we played an audio clip, a recording of a private call between her and Elliot Brand. She didn't know we had it. Let her scream, she had said. Let her think she's winning. By the time the courts catch up, we'll be in Monaco. Gasps, cameras flashing. She went silent. I watched her mouth twist, searching for a new strategy. There wasn't one. Because when your empire is built on silence, even a whisper can bring it down. We won. Unanimous decision. The court dissolved the Riverlight estate. All assets liquidated, proceeds redirected to the Rivers endowment. My parents were banned from operating in any financial or custodial capacity. Alicia was disbarred. Brand was indicted. Harrow walked free but not unchanged. She started a support clinic for late-stage adoptee reunions. And me? I changed my name. Legally. To Natalie Rivers Archer. Because I am both. The girl who was taken. And the woman who took back everything. The courthouse steps were swarmed with microphones and cell phone cameras. Reporters shouted questions that blurred into a single static wall of sound. But I didn't stop. Not right away. I walked down those steps slowly, deliberately, Nathan at my side, Lorraine just behind. The noise followed me like a wave crashing against glass. But it never broke me. That was the difference now. I wasn't breakable anymore. When I reached the sidewalk, I turned. Just slightly. Enough to face the crowd. My voice didn't need a microphone. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reality. And the reality is this. Just because they call it family doesn't mean it's safe. Just because they claim to love you doesn't mean they won't erase you. If you've ever been controlled, manipulated, silenced, or stolen from, know this. The silence breaks now. Cameras clicked like thunder. Someone shouted my name. Natalie, not Kaylin. I smiled. Because this part of the story, this part was mine. I gave 3 interviews that week, all under strict conditions. No edits without approval, no sensationalism, and no focusing on the drama over the structure. Because this story wasn't just a scandal, it was a blueprint. A map of how wealth and trust can be twisted into a weapon. And it was time people saw it. By Friday, I had 12 new cases waiting in my inbox. Saturday brought 17 more. By Monday, we had to pause all new inquiries. Archer and Axiom was overwhelmed. But this time, overwhelmed meant Nebuchadnezzar accepted. I took a few days away from the office, retreated to a small lake house Nathan owned in Maine. No signal, no headlines. Just fog and pine, and the sound of truth settling in my chest like dust after demolition. That's where I found the letter. Tucked inside the lining of the old pendant box I'd kept from my childhood. The one that had a photo of me and my mother, the woman I now knew wasn't my biological parent, tucked inside. It was addressed to me, but it had no signature. Just a single typed page. Old paper, ribbon ink, no date. Natalie, you may never understand why we did what we did, and maybe you never should. But we saw something in you. Something dangerous. Not to others. To the life we built, you didn't bend, not even as a child. And people who don't bend break systems. We couldn't let that happen. I stared at the letter for a long time. Was it from my father, my mother, Elliot, someone else? It didn't matter, because it confirmed what I already knew. They feared me. They had always feared me. And they should have. When I returned to Boston, Archer and Axiom had changed. The lobby was filled with flowers, letters, even thank you gifts from clients and strangers alike. Lorraine handed me a basket of handmade cards from a foster care network in Oregon, children thanking me for helping grown-ups listen. I read every one. Then I got back to work. We needed infrastructure, growth strategy, legislative advocacy. Because exposure was step 1, reform was step 2. Nathan connected me with policy consultants in D.C. We built a coalition: social workers, estate attorneys, ethics boards, survivor advocates. We called it the Open Roots Initiative. Goal: make all guardianship and POA records over 10 years old publicly auditable with consent of the subject. We lobbied, we fundraised, we partnered with tech companies to build secure verification systems, and within 4 months we had a draft bill ready. The Children's Financial Integrity Act. It was introduced in the House by a progressive representative from Illinois who had quietly read my op-ed months earlier and reached out through a mutual contact. The bill made national news. Opposition was fierce. The financial lobby fought hard. Conservative family groups called it an attack on parental rights. But the data didn't lie. Over $2.1 billion in undocumented asset transfers had occurred in cases involving child inheritance between 2000 and 2020. Of those, 73% were done without the full knowledge or long-term consent of the beneficiary. The hearings were brutal. Alicia testified against us. So did several of my parents' old allies. But we had proof. And more importantly, we had people. Real survivors, real names, real harm, and a real solution. The bill passed committee, then the House. It stalled in the Senate. But we weren't done. Because while Washington debated, the world outside was shifting. Archer and Axiom launched a companion platform, Reveal, an encrypted digital archive system where individuals could upload questionable POA documents, questionable transfers, and inheritance tampering complaints. Within a week, we had over 5,000 uploads. Within a month, 18,000. 3 resulted in criminal investigations before the quarter ended. We were reshaping an industry. And then, it got personal again. My mother was hospitalized. Stroke. Alicia emailed me, not to apologize. Not to reconcile, just to say, she's asking for you. I stared at the screen for a long time, and then I went. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and forgotten promises. She looked smaller, frailer, but her eyes still had that flicker, that calculation. Natalie, she whispered. Not Kaylin. I had to control it. You understand now, don't you, what it takes to hold something this big, this heavy? I said nothing. I did what I had to. We all did. You weren't supposed to fight back. Still, I said nothing. She coughed, reached for my hand. I let her take it. Don't let it change you. The war, the power, don't become me. I stood. I didn't become you. I became the woman you couldn't imagine. And I walked out. She died 3 days later. Alicia didn't call. The obituary listed me as a daughter by heart, not by birth. And I was fine with that. Because hearts change. Blood doesn't. But choice, that's the real legacy. And I chose truth. We held a quiet memorial, not for her, for Julia Rivers. I finally found her grave, unmarked, outside a small town in western Massachusetts. We placed a stone, a plaque, I gave a short speech. No cameras, no reporters. Just Lorraine, Nathan, and a few staff. I said, "She was erased. We restore her today." And then I sat with her. For a long time. Back in Boston, something unexpected happened. An invitation. From Oxford. A 1-year fellowship in ethics, law, and restorative justice. All expenses paid. Full academic freedom. Teaching optional. I wasn't sure I deserved it. But I knew I needed it. Not for escape. For perspective. Before I left, I made one final change. I handed full operational control of Archer and Axiom to Lorraine. She resisted, tried to say she wasn't ready. But she was. And I needed to be free. Free to think, to write, to breathe without watching my back. Oxford was quiet, green, humbling. I lived in a stone cottage with ivy and uneven floors. And I wrote. Every day. The story, the system, the aftermath. Not for publication. For clarity. And then, halfway through spring, I found something I didn't expect. Peace. Not the absence of battle, but the absence of doubt. For the first time in my life, I wasn't proving anything. I was simply being. And when I returned, the work continued. The movement expanded. But I wasn't just Kaylin Archer. I wasn't just Natalie Rivers. I was a woman who took the lies they gave her and built truth from them. A woman who lost everything they thought mattered and found what actually did. Legacy. Justice. And herself. By the time I returned from Oxford, everything had changed. Boston was the same, but I wasn't. I walked through the automatic doors of Archer and Axiom's new headquarters, a sleek mid-rise with steel and glass curves just off Atlantic Avenue, and felt the difference in my bones. We weren't just a scrappy firm fighting for exposure anymore. We were a name now, a presence. The receptionist stood to greet me before I could even wave. Her name was Tara, new, young, nervous. "Ms. Rivers, sorry, Archer, welcome back." "Natalie is fine," I said, smiling. "First day?" She nodded, eyes wide. I made a mental note to check in on her later. The firm buzzed around me, conference rooms packed, whiteboards filled, phones ringing. Lorraine stood at the far end of the corridor, arms folded, grinning. "You timed that entrance like a queen. You've done well. We've done well." She walked me through the recent updates, 5 new departments, including 2 dedicated to international advocacy. A partnership with a blockchain company for encrypted POA verification. 3 more legal teams. 37 new clients waiting in queue. "We might have to franchise," she said. I raised an eyebrow. I'm kidding, mostly. But the thought lingered. Because what we were doing here, this wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about scale, structure, future-proofing, truth. I spent that first week reacclimating, sitting in on strategy sessions, offering feedback, helping draft new intake processes. But every night, when I went home to my quiet Beacon Hill apartment, I found myself pacing. Not out of stress. Out of hunger. I wasn't done. The world had seen what was possible, but only in glimpses. We had cracked a window. I wanted to throw open the doors. One evening, as a spring storm cracked the skyline, I opened a folder I hadn't touched in over a year. Not a legal file, not a client case. My personal notes. My mother's fake charities, my father's old investment accounts, Alicia's encrypted messages. There were still threads, loose ends, questions never answered. One in particular had haunted me since the trial. What happened in Paraguay? It was the one phrase I overheard as a child that never left me. I brought it up with Lorraine the next morning. "Paraguay?" she said, frowning. "That's not in any of the official records." "I know, which is why I want to know what they buried." We started digging. It took 3 weeks, and the cooperation of a retired intelligence analyst with a very specific set of offshore clearance skills. What we found chilled me. In 1993, the Archer Family Trust had financed a humanitarian development project outside Asunción. On paper, it was a school-building initiative. In practice, it was a money laundering operation. Funds were funneled through an NGO that had no active employees, no completed projects, and no oversight. One of the listed volunteers? Julia Rivers, my birth mother. It wasn't just an accident that she ended up under their thumb. They found her. They watched her. They chose her. I wasn't adopted out of tragedy. I was procured. Max Tuck's mother. When I told Nathan, he slammed his fist on the table. That's not family drama, Natalie. That's human trafficking. And he was right. It had to be exposed. I flew to Paraguay personally. No press. Just me, Lorraine, and a translator named Jorge, who walked like he had seen too much and trusted too little. We found the original site, overgrown, boarded, but not abandoned. A woman named Mariella kept it clean, said it was once meant to be a training center for displaced mothers. But they never came back, she said. The white men, they left with everything. We interviewed locals, tracked down old municipal filings. And then, on our third night, someone broke into our rented office and erased our cloud backups. They didn't steal the laptops. They just wiped them. That's when we knew it was bigger than even we thought. We returned to Boston with what little we had, a handful of photographs, a paper receipt from 1993, a single interview transcript. It wasn't enough for a prosecution, but it was enough for a documentary. We partnered with an independent media collective, told the story, Julia's story. The Foundation's front. The truth behind the NGO. We called it Namen Connor's The Hidden Ledger. It premiered at Tribeca. People wept. I sat in the front row, fists clenched, heart pounding. Because for the first time, my mother wasn't a ghost. She was a warning. And a witness. The fallout was immediate. Alicia fled the country. Interpol issued a soft warrant. 2 of the original board members of Riverlight were subpoenaed in connection with the Paraguay scheme. And I got a call from someone I never thought I'd hear from again. Elliot Brand. You win, Natalie, he said. I'm tired. I want to talk. Quote, in person. No, in writing, so you can print it when I'm dead. I agreed. He sent me a 30-page confession. Everything. The scheme, the manipulation, the list of children whose identities had been altered. He named names. And when he died 2 months later, alone, in a hotel in Lisbon, I released it. It cracked the industry wide open. That week, Congress passed the Financial Guardianship Reform Act. That week, 5 states opened new investigation bureaus for child beneficiary fraud. That week, 36 women who thought they were alone realized they weren't. And I sat in my office watching the sun rise over the harbor, holding Julia's old ID badge in my hand. We did it, I whispered. And I meant it. There's a moment after the storm when silence feels foreign, like your body is still bracing for thunder even though the sky's gone still. That's what those next few months felt like. The lawsuit was over. The truth was out. The reforms had begun. But I couldn't rest. Not because I didn't trust the system to hold, though part of me didn't, but because something had shifted in me, permanently. I wasn't just someone who'd been wronged. I wasn't even just someone who'd won. I was a builder now. And I had no intention of stopping. So while the world tried to decide what to do with my name, whether to lionize me or villainize me, I got to work on what came next. We launched a new division of Archer and Axiom called Silo, Survivor-Initiated Legal Oversight. It paired whistleblower protection laws with digital forensics, giving people like me the tools to trace, map, and challenge power without waiting for permission. The first case came from Idaho. A 23-year-old woman who'd been named trustee of her disabled brother's inheritance until their uncle moved to dissolve the trust without her knowledge. Silo got her every dollar back. Then came a mother in Georgia whose late husband's will had been rewritten after his death by his brother, a notary public. Forged signatures. Real consequences. We had wins, we had setbacks, but we had momentum. And that was everything. Still, there were nights I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking not about the cases ahead, but the ones we never found. The Julias. The Natalies. The ones erased before anyone could pull them back into the light. One night, near midnight, I received a letter. Not an email. Not a subpoena. An actual envelope. Cream paper. Embossed edge. No return address. Inside, one sentence. He's still alive. That's all it said. No name, no explanation, just that. A punch to the lungs. I stared at the words until the letters blurred. He? Who? My father? No, he had died 6 months earlier. Heart failure. Confirmed. Elliot Brand? Dead in Lisbon. There was only one possibility I hadn't considered. The one person I never knew to look for. My birth father. I had spent years unraveling the lies my adoptive family built. Years uncovering the truth about Julia. But I had never asked about the man who helped bring me into the world. Until now. The next morning, I met Lorraine at the office with the letter. She read it twice, then looked at me and said, "Let's find him." We started where we always start, the records. Julia's old contacts, the NGO logs from Paraguay, old employee databases, even arrest records. And then we found it. A shipping ledger, dated 1991, 2 years before Julia's death. Her name was listed alongside another, Miguel Asosa. Export documentation consultant, American passport, dual citizenship. Cross-referencing confirmed something stunning. He had been detained in 1994 in a border town near Bolivia. Held on suspicion of document fraud but released without charge. After that, nothing. No tax returns, no official residence, no employment records. Just a silence that stretched 3 decades. Until 2 weeks later, when we found a picture. It was grainy. A festival photo from an Argentinian tourism blog. But he was there. Older, beard flecked with white, holding the hand of a small girl. Caption: Locals celebrate St. Roque Festival in Corrientes. Corrientes. A provincial town along the Parana River. I booked a flight. Nathan told me not to go alone. Lorraine packed a satellite phone. But I knew I had to do this without the trappings. No assistants. No lawyers. Just me. I arrived in Corrientes under a silver sky, the humidity curling the edges of my passport. I stayed at a small inn run by a widow who made fresh bread every morning and told me to avoid the river after dark. I asked around, showed the photo, said I was a researcher looking into old infrastructure projects. 2 days in, someone pointed me toward a man named Miguel who fixed fishing nets near the riverbank. I found him crouched under a cypress tree, hands calloused, eyes distant. "Señor Sosa?" He looked up slowly, said nothing. I showed him the photo. "That's you, isn't it?" He nodded. "And her?" I asked, pointing to the girl. He hesitated, then, I nieta, my granddaughter." We sat in silence. The river lapped at the edge of the dock. He reached into a tin box and pulled out something I hadn't seen since I was 6. A brass locket. My locket? He opened it. Inside was the same photo of Julia that I carried in my wallet. "You knew her," I whispered. "I loved her," he said. He spoke slowly, in fragments. He had met Julia in Asunción while working logistics for the development project. They fell in love. She got pregnant. He wanted to marry her, leave the NGO, start over. But then, Julia received a letter, a threat, and one night, she disappeared. He never found her again. I thought she was dead until 2 years later, when I saw her name on a hospital registry, but by the time I got there, she was gone. They said the baby had been taken by a legal agency. No records, no files, nothing. He looked at me, tears brimming. "And now you're here." I couldn't speak. We sat by the water for hours, the silence deeper than anything I'd known. When I left, I gave him my number, my email, a promise that this wasn't goodbye. "You have a granddaughter," I said. "She's fierce and brilliant and sometimes too stubborn for her own good." He laughed. And then he hugged me, the kind of hug that presses memory into bone. Back in Boston, I didn't tell anyone right away. Not because I wanted to hide it, because I wanted to hold it. Just for me. But eventually, I shared it with Lorraine. She wept. And then we started working on something new. A digital registry. One that pairs children lost in systems with relatives searching for them. We partnered with AI firms, data labs, archivists, and genetic researchers. We called it Lantern. Because even in the dark, people deserve a light to find their way home. Within the first 2 months, Lantern made 11 matches. And the letters started coming again. "Thank you for helping me find my father. I didn't know I had a sister until your team called. They told me I was an only child. You proved them wrong." And with every match, every reconnected name, I felt something settle inside me. The kind of peace that comes not from winning, but from healing. Because my story wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about reunion. And the future. The day we launched the global version of Lantern, I stood on a stage in Geneva, same conference where I'd first told my story, and said, "They tried to erase us with paperwork. We answered with light." The applause was thunder. But the silence that followed, that was the moment I'll never forget. Because it wasn't empty. It was full. Of all the voices they tried to bury. Rising. And for once, they weren't screaming. They were singing. 2 weeks after Lantern went live globally, I stood in the middle of our operations floor at Archer and Axiom, watching the map on the central screen light up like constellations, each glowing dot a match request, a beacon of connection someone dared to send across continents and decades. Europe glowed first, then Africa, then Latin America. Some lights dimmed quickly, dead ends. But others flared brighter, pulsing with life, as the registry confirmed connections. We were seeing legacy reassembled in real time. Every dot had a story, a name, a question answered. But then, one night, an anomaly appeared. A request pinged the system. No origin point, no name. Just a code. E77. Tagged for emergency verification. Our protocols kicked in. The submission had been routed through multiple proxies, but the payload was encrypted cleanly. Whoever sent it knew what they were doing. Lorraine brought it to me immediately. "It references you." I sat up straighter. The data packet contained 3 files. 1. A high-resolution scan of a contract between Riverlight Foundation and a firm called RNS Holdings, dated 1992. 2. A handwritten note, digitally captured, bearing only the words, *, "They never told you about Oslo." 3. A single-line signature field on the contract, J. Rivers. I stared at the page so long my coffee went cold. Julia. She signed something, a deal, a document, in Oslo, a year before her death. But I had scoured every known record. She had never traveled to Norway. There were no flight logs, no passport stamps. Which meant only one thing. The records had been scrubbed. I booked a flight that night. Lorraine didn't even try to talk me out of it this time. We knew what this meant. Someone was reaching out from inside the old network. And they were taking a risk to do it. The flight to Oslo was cold and long. I read the contract 100 times. It wasn't complex, just vague. A rights transfer agreement. It gave RNS Holdings custodial discretion over, quote, select participants of the Riverlight Maternal Program. Quote. That phrase chilled me. Participants, like subjects in a trial, or inventory in a ledger. My name wasn't listed. But the code in the margin, NCR07, matched a line I remembered from one of Julia's stored medical forms. Subject NCR07 cleared for relocation. I spent my first day in Oslo at the National Archives. Nothing. Day 2, I met with a journalist named Ingrid. She had reported on missing children in the Nordic adoption scandal of the late 80s. When I showed her the scan, she paled. This was real, she said. They used vague contracts to justify placing children into international systems. Most were never traced. I asked if she'd heard of RNS Holdings. She nodded. It was dismantled, or so they said. She gave me an address, an old shipping warehouse along the harbor that had once held their microfilm archive before it was supposedly burned. I didn't wait. The building was padlocked, fenced, and half covered in ivy, but the side gate had a broken hinge and the back window was loose. Inside, the dust choked me, but there were boxes, dozens of them. And one of them bore my initials. Not NR, not KA, but CRA. Claire Rivers Archer. A name that never officially existed. Inside, paperwork, photos, a cassette tape, a small, worn baby blanket with a faded tag, property of St. Cecilia's Nursery, and a second folder. This one held a list of over 300 names. All women, all marked as, quote, conditional transfer subjects. And next to each name, a 3-digit code. Mine was there, NCR07. Ingrid helped me scan everything. We uploaded it to a secure server. Then we leaked it. To The Hague. Within 72 hours, the International Criminal Court announced an inquiry. They didn't name Riverlight publicly, but they referenced RNS Holdings. And that was enough. We had cracked the door open, now we had to blow it off its hinges. Back in Boston, Lorraine mobilized every satellite office. Lantern traffic tripled. Survivors across Europe and South America submitted copies of old birth certificates, IDs, court files, and the map lit up again. This time, in red. Indicators for verified instances of custody fraud. Then, one morning, I received a call from Miguel, my birth father. Someone came to the village, he said. A man asking questions. Not local, military posture. He had a photo of you. He didn't give a name. I felt the temperature drop. Do you feel safe? I can disappear, he said calmly. I've done it before. But you, they won't touch me. Not anymore. I wasn't sure if that was true, but I said it anyway. Because I couldn't let fear take this from me. 2 days later, the servers were hit. Not Lantern. Not Archer, an Axiom. A private backup node we used only for air-gapped storage. It had been airlocked, unplugged, unlisted. And still, they got in. They erased 200 gigabytes of archived Riverlight communications, 32 whistleblower documents. Gone. I stared at the monitor, shaking. We were careful, Lorraine whispered. Not careful enough. We traced the breach to a proxy chain originating from Singapore, then rerouted through Finland. Nathan's contacts flagged a single lead, a mercenary cybersecurity group called Black Cloak, privately hired, used by financial cartels and compromised governments. No one knew who paid them, until we got lucky. One of their former developers, now in witness protection, reached out through a burner account. Your name was on the hit list, the message read. They wanted your data wiped, but not your firm's, just yours. They weren't trying to stop Lantern. They were trying to erase Time Me. I went silent for a week. Not to hide. To write. I drafted a 15,000-word article titled The Disappeared Daughter. I detailed everything. The Riverlight scandal, the Paraguay operation, the Oslo files, the BLACKCLOAK breach. I submitted it to the New Yorker. They ran it in print and digital. The backlash was immediate, but not against me, against the institutions that had let this happen. Congress reopened hearings. The Hague accelerated investigations. Norway's parliament called for a national audit. And through it all, I kept one promise. Never flinch. Because silence is what they count on. And silence is what I shattered. One dot at a time. One name at a time. One child at a time. 10 days after the disappeared daughter ran in *The New Yorker, I walked into our Boston office to find 3 plainclothes agents waiting in the conference room. They weren't from the FBI, not Interpol either. Their IDs bore the seal of the Department of Homeland Security. "Ms. Archer," one of them said, motioning to the seat across from him, "we need to talk." I knew that tone. It wasn't a request. Lorraine was already in the room, her jaw set like concrete. Nathan joined 2 minutes later, briefcase in hand. "What's the nature of this inquiry?" he asked flatly. The lead agent, Thompson, slid a file across the table. Inside were stills from our Oslo findings, scans from Paraguay, screenshots of the BLACK-CLOAK logs. "We're not here to intimidate you," he said. "We're here because you've stirred something much older than you realize." I didn't blink. "I'm aware." "Then you'll also understand why certain governments are suddenly very interested in your data." He opened a second folder. Dozens of pages, black bars everywhere. Operation Greenvale, he said, ran from 1985 to 1996. Its stated goal was to facilitate diplomatic relations in South America through philanthropic programs. I laughed. "You mean covert child trafficking through ghost charities?" He didn't smile. "It wasn't supposed to go this far, but someone broke protocol. A rogue cluster within the operation. The Riverlight Cell. They weren't part of the original structure. They took the model and weaponized it." "So you knew?" "Not everything. Not until now." Nathan leaned forward. "What do you want from her?" Agent Thompson hesitated, then slid a card across the table. "A testimony. Not in court. Not yet. An internal intelligence review, and a secure drop of any remaining Oslo files. In exchange, we'll classify you as an external consultant and keep you protected from retaliatory foreign warrants." It wasn't an ask. It was a bargain. I picked up the card, ran my thumb over the embossed watermark. "I'll consider it, but understand something, Agent. I don't bury truth. I publish it." He gave me a tight nod. "That's why we came to you first." When they left, Nathan exhaled so hard it fogged the glass. "You're in a different game now." "I always was," I said. "They just finally noticed." We complied, strategically. I gave the agency a limited set of Oslo files, enough to prove credibility, enough to keep me off the official radar. In exchange, we gained access to a classified ledger, one that listed 42 organizations with ties to the Greenvale-era projects. Some had since collapsed, but 6 were still active under new names. One of them? Northwell Partners, a London-based fiduciary advisory group. Sounded harmless. Until we cross-referenced it with Julia's name. Her final hospital records listed a Northwell consultant as the signatory for her emergency placement. Someone from Northwell had facilitated my transfer. I didn't wait. Within days, I was on a plane to London. I met with a solicitor we trusted. Lorraine flew in separately. We staged everything with care. I walked into Northwell's office on Threadneedle Street like any other investor. Introduced myself as Claire Archer, inherited trust portfolio, seeking asset reallocation advice. They welcomed me with open arms. Their senior advisor, Harold Levins, was polished, charming, and completely unaware that I had a listening device sewn into my coat. "We specialize in cross-border estate transitions," he said, helping families preserve assets during complex international transfers. "Even the sensitive ones?" "Especially those." I smiled. "How far back do your archives go?" He grinned. "Far enough." 2 hours later, Lorraine and I sat in a nearby hotel room, replaying the audio. "You'd be surprised how many of our clients came through Greenvale. We don't advertise it, of course, but the legacy accounts, those are our crown jewels." We had him. The next step? Pressure. We drafted an anonymous leak, sent it to *The Guardian, included just enough detail to spark interest, not enough to burn our source. They ran a story within the week. Headline: Ghost Trusts and Vanishing Children, the Quiet Legacy of Cold War Financial Diplomacy. Northwell denied everything. Until a whistleblower emerged. Her name was Ava Lennox, former compliance officer. She had worked at Northwell for 6 years. Quit after discovering a series of non-standard onboarding procedures involving minor beneficiaries with no traceable birth records. We flew her to Boston. She brought a hard drive. It held over 1,200 documents, internal memos, meeting recordings, digital copies of forged POAs, and one particularly devastating email. *RE-NCR-07, per directive, finalize custody assignment under revised identity schema. Await confirmation from RNSOS. It was dated 4 days before Julia's death. They didn't just erase me. They choreographed it. I released a statement. Public, sharp. To everyone who thought the past would stay buried under red tape and initials, your expiration date has arrived. Social media exploded. Senators tweeted, NGOs rallied, a global petition hit 5 million signatures. Within 3 days, Northwell's offices were raided. And I received another letter. Handwritten, no return address. But this time, it wasn't a threat. It was an apology. Just 3 lines. I didn't know what they did to her. I didn't know they'd hurt Julia. I never should have signed. No signature. But the handwriting matched old notes from Elliot Brand. I kept it. Because even the architects eventually flinch. With Northwell exposed, our data team uncovered a cascade effect. 3 more advisory firms collapsed within a month. A former Riverlight trustee surrendered over 200 pages of financial records. The ICC expanded its probe. And Lantern? It tripled in reach. We built a secure reunification program, paired with legal teams, trauma counselors, and advocacy networks. We called it HOME, Heritage Outreach for Matched Entities. HOME launched with 14 regional hubs. Within 4 weeks, 96 family reunions were initiated. Some ended in heartbreak. Some ended in hugs. But they ended in truth. And that's all I ever wanted. Truth. Real, raw, unfiltered. The kind that doesn't fit into headlines. The kind that rebuilds people. The kind that reclaims names. Even mine. By the time the 10th Home Center opened in Cape Town, the world had started to call it a movement. I wasn't so sure. Movements come and go. This didn't feel like a moment in history. It felt like an excavation. Bone by bone, name by name, identity by identity. We weren't sweeping in like activists. We were digging people out of the silence they'd been buried under for decades. That's not a movement. That's a resurrection. Still, the label stuck. News outlets dubbed it the Archer Effect. I hated the term, because it made this story sound like mine alone. But I knew better. There were hundreds of us now, thousands. Children grown into confused adults, women with names they never chose, men who never got to know their real mothers, families torn apart by signatures they never saw. Every day brought new emails, new archives, new voices. And with every voice came a new battle. We were ready for most of them, but not the one that came next. It started with a flagged Lantern entry, a match submitted from Indonesia pinging against a decades-old Argentine immigration file. That in itself wasn't unusual. We had hundreds of cross-border hits each month now. But this one was different. It wasn't a search for a child. It was a search for a man who claimed to have helped create Riverlight. Not as a founder, as a handler. His name was Arturo Quispe, a Peruvian national with ties to the regional diplomatic missions during the late 80s. His name had never come up in our investigations, not once. Until now. He contacted us through an encrypted portal, claimed to have documents, names, A list of recovered subjects from 1989 to 1997. But he wouldn't share them over the wire. They're not just records, his message read. They're proof of a deal. Your mother signed it. But she was never told what she signed. I flew to Jakarta within the week. This time, I brought 2 security staff. Not because I was afraid of him. Because I was afraid of what I might do if he was lying. We met in a coastal cafe, tucked under a ruined hotel near the docks. He was old. Mid-70s. Eyes sharp but sunken. "You look like her," he said. "You knew Julia?" He nodded. "Not the way you want me to. Not the way I wish I had." Then he slid me a folder. Inside, a grainy photo of a conference room. 8 people seated at a table. One of them, unmistakably, was my mother. Her hair tied back, her hands folded, her eyes distant. The caption, Yogyakarta Accord, June 1992. "This was Riverlight's real birth," Arturo said. "Before the press releases, before the foundation. This was when they decided the terms." "What terms?" He pulled out a document. A typed agreement. It wasn't legal. It wasn't even official. It was a consensus protocol, an internal agreement between multiple organizations to jointly manage and distribute custody of children born to certain maternal care programs in South America. "Julia signed this under duress," Arturo said. "She didn't know what she was signing. They told her it was a release form for continued medical support." I scanned the page. Under each signature, a code name. Julia Rivers, NCR07 Guardian /COOPERANT, deferred. There it was again. My designation. She had been tricked, legally coerced, and they used it to erase us both. I felt rage clawing at the inside of my ribs. But I kept my voice steady. "Why now? Why give this to me?" Arturo hesitated, then said, "Because my granddaughter matched in Lantern last month. You helped bring her home. I've done many things I'm not proud of, Ms. Archer. Let me do one thing right." He handed over everything. Then he left. And just like that, another pillar of the system collapsed. Back in Boston, I convened an emergency strategy session. Lorraine, Nathan, 3 international legal advisors, a representative from The Hague's inquiry team. I laid the files out on the table. "This changes everything." Nathan nodded. "It moves us from fraud to conspiracy." Quote, "And not just financial conspiracy," Lorraine added. "This is custodial trafficking with international backing." The Hague rep, a young man named Leo Vandermeer, looked stunned. "If this is authenticated, it could trigger war crimes classification." "Good," I said, "because that's what it was." We moved fast. We uploaded redacted versions of the documents to a new public archive, Tracer the repository for adoption and custody exploitation records. Within hours, whistleblowers from 5 new countries came forward. Within days, 37 government institutions issued public statements. Most of them denied everything. But it was too late. The archive had gone viral. And then came the backlash. Not threats. Litigation. 3 separate legacy families filed suits against me personally. Libel, data theft, damages for emotional distress. It was absurd. But it was strategic. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to drain us. We pushed back. Hard. I gave another testimony in The Hague. Presented evidence. Brought Arturo in by proxy. And this time, I ended my statement with something new. I am not the exception. I am the blueprint of a system built on silence. And I am not silent anymore. The room stood. Not just clapping. Crying. I returned to Boston and found something waiting for me. An envelope. Inside, a photo of Julia. Older than I remembered her in any other picture, late 30s. Standing in front of a battered red car, one hand resting on her belly. The other holding a sign that read, "Claire will never belong to them." My knees buckled. It wasn't just defiance. It was prophecy, and it was time to fulfill it. I stared at the photograph of Julia for a long time. That handwritten sign, those defiant eyes. Snikia, Claire will never belong to them. The world had tried to make her invisible, a footnote in a scandal, a tragic mother who got swept away. But she had left messages, trail markers. She had fought back the only way she could, by believing I might survive where she couldn't. And I had. But survival wasn't enough anymore. Not when we were this close to reshaping the entire system that failed us. Tracer, our global archive, exploded overnight. Traffic overloaded the server within 6 hours of the Oslo documents going public. Every journalist with a conscience had something to say. Every survivor had something to submit. But amid the noise, something else surfaced. Patterns. Lorraine and her data team began connecting the dots between archival records and modern financial entities. What started as a historical index quickly became a forensic tool. Hidden holding companies, shell trusts, nonprofits laundering post-adoption residuals. Some of them were still active, including a conglomerate registered in Zurich, Alta Vita Holdings. From the outside, they looked clean. Legacy-focused private asset custodianship, advertised as, quote, stewards of intergenerational wealth. But internally, a mess of fake beneficiaries and silent partners, including names we recognized. Elliot Brand, Alicia Archer, and one I hadn't expected, Richard Archer, my adoptive father. His death had been ruled natural, uncontested. His estate settled quietly. But Alta Vita's books told a different story. He had funneled capital into Alta Vita 6 months before he died, discreetly, through a Cayman account tied to an offshore grantor trust. And the beneficiary listed on the account? Not me. Not Alicia. A name I didn't recognize. Sarah Harwood. We pulled records. Sarah Harwood had no digital presence, no work history, no tax filings. But she had a trust fund. And a passport. Issued 2 years ago. Under diplomatic protection. Lorraine called me at 2 a.m. Natalie, I think she's a cover, a storage identity. Someone built her to hide money. But what? There's a birth certificate attached. She sent it over. My breath stopped. Sarah Harwood. Born in Paraguay, 1993. Mother, Julia Rivers. Father, Miguel Sosa. I stared at the name. Sarah. Not me. A sister. A twin. The date matched my own. The hospital matched. The file showed 2 births. But I had only ever known myself. She survived, I whispered. Or, Lorraine said gently, they hid her. Everything changed. We reopened every case involving maternal pairs from that hospital. We traced Alta Vita's funding lines. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Alicia. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice brittle. I told you I'd bury you. Then let's meet in the dirt. Silence. There's someone else, I said. Someone we were never told about. She didn't respond, but I heard her exhale. Sarah, I said, you knew. No, she said slowly, I didn't. Not until after Dad died, but yes. She's real. Where is she? Off-grid. They took her out of the rotation. She wasn't placed. She was held, managed. Managed by who? Alta Vita. Quote, of course. Why are you telling me this? Because this ends with us, Claire, you and me. If you find her, everything collapses. That's the plan. She hung up. I sat in the dark, staring at the phone. Then I booked a flight. Zurich. Then plan. This time, we didn't go as Archer and Axiom. We went as journalists. Me, Lorraine. 2 former correspondents turned investigators. And a contact in Swiss compliance enforcement who owed us a favor. We arrived at Alta Vita's offices in tailored coats and neutral tones. Smiled politely. Asked for a meeting with their public liaison. We got a tour instead. They showed us the lobby, the records hall, the investment offices. But when I asked about the beneficiaries, things shifted. I'm afraid that information is strictly protected. Even from auditors? Even then. So we waited. Then, late at night, our contact sent a message. One of the Alta Vita custodians had triggered a dormant client verification protocol. Name, Sarah Harwood. Location, Lucerne. Under psychiatric care. Hidden, not for health. For silence. Mac. We reached Lucerne just after dawn. The facility was remote, modern, elegant, more luxury spa than hospital. But the intake records were clear. Sarah Harwood had been admitted under a, quote, wellness and memory protection program. The translation? Controlled isolation. We posed as legal advocates from a UK trust, cited an obscure clause from Switzerland's custodial arbitration policy. And they let us in. She was sitting in a library, alone, a white robe, bare feet. She looked like me. Same eyes, same mouth, same furrow when she read. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't speak. I walked in, sat across from her, held up a photo of Julia. She looked at it, then at me, and started to cry. The moment Sarah started to cry, everything stopped. There was no camera, no plan, no agenda. Just two sisters, separated by 30 years of lies, looking at the face they should have known all along. She covered her mouth like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to feel it. I didn't say anything. I just handed her the photo of Julia again. She took it with trembling fingers, then whispered, "That's her, isn't it?" I nodded. She stared at it for a long time, then said, "They told me she died before I was born, that I had no family." I wanted to scream, to tear down the walls around us, but instead I asked gently, "Do you know who you are?" She blinked. "I know what they called me, Sarah Harwood." "That's not your name?" She looked up. "You're Claire, just like me. They split us, gave us new names, buried the truth. But we're twins." She smiled. It broke my heart. I always felt like someone was missing, like I was waiting for someone to arrive. I reached across the table. "I'm here now." It took 3 days to get her released. Alta Vita pushed back hard. They filed injunctions, questioned our legal standing, cited mental health protective statutes. But I had one thing they didn't. Proof. I presented Julia's birth records, the Oslo files, and the fabricated trust documents. Our compliance contact issued a formal request for judicial review. They folded. Sarah walked out of that facility wrapped in my coat, clutching a copy of Julia's letter. The sun hit her face like a welcome. We didn't talk on the drive back. She sat staring out the window, the Alps rolling past in gentle waves. When we reached the hotel, she turned to me and said, "What now?" I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know. Until that moment, everything had been about asterisk getting to the truth. Now came the harder part. Norse living in it. We returned to Boston a week later. Sarah stood in the Archer and Axiom lobby, eyes wide. "This is yours?" "No," I said. "This is ours now." We didn't hide her. We told the world. I stood on stage with her at the Lantern Global Summit and introduced her as who she really was. Sarah Claire Rivers. Julia's daughter. My sister. The missing half of the story. The room stood. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like justice catching its breath. From that day on, we did everything together. Sarah joined the firm, not as a figurehead, but as a learner. She soaked up everything: estate law, survivor policy, trust analysis. She worked harder than anyone I'd seen, not to prove anything, just to asterisk belong. And she did. We co-founded a new program, Second Roots, a trauma-informed mentorship initiative for post-reunification families. The tagline? Asterisk healing isn't a return, it's a beginning. By year's end, 19 countries had implemented transparency mandates inspired by Tracer. Lantern received a United Nations Human Dignity Award, and I was invited to testify in Geneva again, this time with Sarah beside me. She spoke first. Her voice didn't tremble. They stole my name, my mother, my sister, and my story, but they didn't steal my voice. I'm using it now. Then it was my turn. I looked at the room, the same oak-paneled chamber where I once begged the world to listen, and I said, "We are not anomalies. We are not exceptions. We are not rare. We are the product of a system that was engineered to disappear us, and we refuse to vanish." That night, we walked out into a soft snowfall. Sarah turned to me and said, "It's not over, is it?" "No," I said, "it's just beginning." 6 months later, I stood on the edge of a field in Paraguay. Julia's field. We had tracked it down, a plot of land she had leased for a small gardening co-op. There was no building anymore, just overgrown grass and wildflowers. I knelt, ran my fingers through the soil. Sarah placed a stone beside me. Not a grave. A marker. Engraved with one line. "You can't silence roots." We held hands, closed our eyes, and said goodbye. Not to her, but to the silence. Icon plans. The final audit of Altavita exposed over $2.4 billion in redirected legacy funds, 47 shell accounts, 9 unprosecuted deaths reopened for investigation. I testified in 4 courts. Sarah did too. Alicia was formally disbarred and lost her citizenship status in multiple countries. Northwell shuddered. Riverlight's surviving board members faced international arrest warrants. The Hague issued a landmark ruling classifying the Riverlight-era coercions as crimes against identity. We won. But more than that, we named what was done. And in naming it, we took it out of the shadows. We published the book together. Timed The Ledger and the River. Part memoir, part indictment, part survivor guide. It hit bestseller lists in 12 countries. But more than sales, it sparked stories. Letters, forums, essays, podcast episodes. A woman in Seoul wrote, "I read this and found my real name." A man in Nairobi wrote, "I no longer feel like a shadow." A teenager in Montreal wrote, "They said I was a mistake, but now I see I was a cover-up." We wrote back to every single one, because every reclaimed story makes ours stronger. And our story, now, was undeniable. A year to the day after Sarah's release, we stood on a new stage. The Lantern Legacy Forum. Global. Broadcast in 40 languages. We wore matching pins. An emblem shaped like 2 overlapping fingerprints. We said one thing. Together. In unison. We are not theirs. We are not lost. We are not broken. We are returned. And the world heard it. Finally. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.